Good evening and welcome to you all to the 2020 Influenza webinar hosted by the Immunisation Coalition. My name is Susie Blackburn, Information and Event Officer at the Immunisation Coalition. For your information, our mission is to advocate for immunisation to protect Australians against infectious disease. Now, we are expecting a very busy night tonight. We'll attempt to answer your questions this evening. If you have questions, you can just pop them into the Q&A in the system and we will get to them when we can. A recording of this event will be uploaded to the IC in the coming week. Any unanswered questions will also be addressed in a supporting FAQ document on the website. Our presenter tonight is Angela Newbound from the Adelaide Public Health Network. Angela is a highly respected public health expert and IC member. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you very much, Susie, and welcome to everybody that is joining us this evening, and thank you for giving us an hour of your time. Please feel free to ask lots and lots of questions coming into the inbox. Susie will monitor those and she will very politely and professionally interrupt me halfway through anything that I'm saying, so I can answer those questions for you.
Absolutely.
All right, no worries. So there's a question already in the box, but we will get to that slide as we go down. So I think with influenza, I'm quite sure that all of you that are listening to this webinar are certainly very aware of what influenza is. And, you know, we're quite inundated at the moment with lots of respiratory illnesses, and obviously all of the focus is on COVID-19. But we do need to remember that there are other respiratory illnesses are going around, and one of those that we are seeing already this year is influenza. And the problem that we have with flu is that some people don't have any symptoms at all. So those people who are asymptomatic can actually be spreading flu without even knowing that they're carrying it. How well do they transmit flu? There is an indication that the more severe disease that somebody has, the higher risk and rate of transmission there is. So asymptomatic people can certainly transmit disease, but probably not as greatly as what they would if they were unwell. But we do know that most individuals will get a bout of the flu at some stage of their life. They will get over it. It could be mild illness. It can knock people around for a couple of weeks. We do hear some people saying that they had flu disease and really it was a good 6 months before they felt as though they were back to normal again. But we also do know that there are some people that are really severely affected with this disease and developed complications as well. So if we look at influenza viruses, you're probably all as well, but there are the two surface glycoproteins that play the most significant role, and that is hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. And the important thing to think about when we're looking at these particular H's and N's, and this is where we get the flu subtyping. So you're all familiar with H1N1 or H3N2, etc. So what they're talking about is the hemagglutinin and the neuraminidase. And the hemagglutinin role really is what attaches the virus onto your healthy cell, and it initiates that entrance of the virus into your cell. The neuraminidase, however, allows the virus then, once it's replicated, to what they call bud out of your cell. And so that's basically bursting through your cell wall. Your cell will then die. So you can understand that somebody that's got comorbidities, having a lot of cell death is really not a good option for them. So important that we just understand those roles of hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. Flu viruses generally, we talk about flu A and flu B more so. There are other types of flu. There is influenza C and E, etc. But really the ones that mostly affect humans are influenza A and B. There is the ability for the hemagglutinin neuraminidase spikes to change, and therefore we do get this variation of strains circulating each year. So whilst that is just a seasonal drifting, we do need to keep up with the vaccines to make sure that our vaccine strains are well matched to our circulating strains. Obviously, this is all looking very much like COVID, isn't it? It's all of the sore throat, it's the, fever, it's the, muscle aches, etc. But there are some subtle differences between the symptoms that people may experience with flu to other respiratory illnesses. But it's important to really understand that flu viruses can survive really quite well for probably 8 hours or so on hard surfaces, such as stainless steel and plastics, etc. We've always maintained that practicing good hand hygiene, using soap and water where you can, alcohol-based hand gel if you can't get to soap and running water, good cough and sneeze etiquette. We've always advocated for this, but at the moment people must think that this is a brand new strategy because they're all rushing out and you can't now buy a bar of soap or any hand gel. So yes, it's quite interesting. But definitely to get people immunised against flu is one of our key messages. Using your alcohol-based hand gels, it does kill viruses, but it is better to use soap and water, in fact. The hand gels don't really clean your hands like soap and water do. They don't remove dirt or debris, whereas soap and water not only kills the viruses, but it physically removes them as well. And then they go down the drain after you've washed your hands, which is pretty fantastic. So, like I said, there's a lot of focus at the moment on COVID-19, but we've really got to remember that there are these other viruses that are circulating as well. So if we're looking back at influenza, one of the abilities that it does have is in some individuals cause complications. And there are a range of complications that can happen. Obviously, those very familiar to us along the top few dot points. Rye syndrome, it is a rare syndrome, but it's pretty serious because it involves swelling of the liver and the brain, mostly affecting children and teenagers that are recovering from a viral infection, most commonly flu or chickenpox, to be quite honest. And Guillain-Barré syndrome is also a bit of a funny one. Obviously GBS affects a person's immune system, and it's where the immune system attacks the body itself. It's thought that in some cases at least the immune attack is initiated, of course, to fight the infection, which is what our immune system is supposed to do. But it's the fact that some of the chemicals on the infecting bacteria or viruses resemble those on our nerve cells, and therefore they become targets of the attack. So the exact cause of GBS is not known. Most cases usually start a few days or weeks following a respiratory or a gastrointestinal viral infection, but certainly some significant complications. disease to our community. It's a costly disease to our health system. We know that the number of influenza-associated deaths reported certainly does not represent the true mortality. The numbers of notified cases do not at all represent the true numbers of disease cases in their community. We know that as many as 50% of infections with normal seasonal flu can be asymptomatic. So that's a fairly high proportion of people that, because they don't know that they're sick, are not going and getting tested and therefore not being notified. So they are a complete reservoir for the virus, and it's an invisible reservoir, if you like. So think about how busy you're going to be with COVID-19 in your practices and your organisations. The last thing that we're wanting you to see is people with influenza disease. So as soon as your vaccines are available to you, please, please, please start vaccinating, and please, please consider running separate nurse-led immunisation clinics in your practices to free up your GP time. You would need to speak with your state health or state and territory health departments about the process for that to happen, but we can't afford to not be running vaccination clinics, not only for influenza, but for all the childhood program vaccines, because practices and GPs are overrun with people with COVID-19. So if we look at the burden of disease in 2019, we can see we had a horrendous year, over 300,000 confirmed. So this is laboratory confirmed influenza cases. So like I said, this does not measure people that didn't get tested, obviously. 2019, it was a H3N2 year. That was the predominant strain that was circulating. There is a problem with that particular strain. It's caused a great deal of difficulty in order to get a good vaccine against H3N2 because it just doesn't grow very efficiently in agriculture. But these H3 viruses do evolve over time. There's changes to their receptor binding ability, so they can be a bit of a tricky virus. 2018, we had a more mild year. We only had about 58,500 laboratory confirmed cases, and it was a H1 in 1 year. So it very much depends on what the circulating virus is to what type of a year we will be having. But there were quite a substantial number of hospitalisations. The median age for deaths that were notified was 86 years old. The range was between less than 1 and 106 years of age. So definitely our elderly population are more at risk of succumbing to this disease. About 28.5% of people admitted with confirmed influenza were children, aged 15 years and younger. 31% were adults aged between 16 and 64, and about 40% were adults aged 65 and older. And of the children admitted with confirmed influenza, around about 5.2% of them were admitted to ICU, compared to about 8.5% of adults between 16 and 64 years, and 5.4% of adults aged over 65. So it can cause significant illness in these individuals. Like I said, our elderly population are certainly at greatest risk of dying with this particular disease. There are a number of people in our community that are at risk of complications to influenza infection. Definitely our older Australians and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we know from all age, across the whole age spectrum, they do tend to get severe influenza disease at an earlier age. They tend to have higher rates of hospitalisation, and they have longer hospital stays when they do end up in hospital. So they are very much an important community to immunise. We know that our individuals over 65 years of age, we've got this wonderful thing called immunosenescence that happens to us as we age, where our immune system just does not work as well. So they are at significant risk of developing complications. Other people that are at significant risk are pregnant women, people with cardiac disease, your chronic respiratory conditions, and your other chronic illnesses such as your diabetes, etc. So we will talk a little bit more about some of these as we go through. So individuals greater than 6 months with these chronic conditions that predispose them with severe influenza are also a whole range of different conditions. Interestingly enough, obesity, although the risk of influenza complications really do increase substantially in obese individuals, they are not listed on the free influenza program unless they have another medical condition that's compromising them. We know that people who are immunocompromised have an increased risk from flu, and we know that they may have a reduced response to the vaccine. And we do need to be really transparent about this. And it's so important to make sure that other family members that live with these immune-compromised people certainly are getting vaccinated as well. So we need to consider really everybody over 6 months of age. Please note that the NIP now funds influenza vaccine for all children aged 6 months to less than 5 years of age. So once a child has had their 5th birthday, they are no longer eligible to receive free flu vaccine. But just because they can't get it for free doesn't mean that you stop offering flu vaccine. They will need to have a prescription, of course. Once a child gets to 10 years of age now, in almost all jurisdictions where pharmacists are immunising, the age that pharmacists can now immunise is from 10 years of age. So please check with your local, state and territory departments to make sure that pharmacists in your region are able to vaccinate children from 10 years of age. Otherwise, they will need a prescription. We know that our elderly and RACFs and other long-term care facilities are at risk. They live in close quarters. There's a lot of staff that come and go. They have a lot of people coming and visiting them. Homeless people or people experiencing homelessness usually have a higher prevalence of having other chronic medical conditions anyway. I'm based in South Australia and very, very, very pleased to say that the South Australian government has funded a flu program here in South Australia this year for all people that are experiencing homelessness. Flu vaccines should certainly be considered for anybody in essential services, so our police, our fire departments, our hospital staff, because when things go pear-shaped, they are the people that still need to be out there functioning. So if we look at those people with severe risk of complications with chronic heart disease, for example. We definitely can see that although there are a large number of contributors to cardiac disease, we know that cholesterol-containing deposits or plaque in the arteries and inflammation is usually to blame for coronary artery disease. Influenza induces an arterial wall inflammation, and that inflammation may well trigger plaque destabilisation. And when we have plaque that is destabilised and it starts to break away from the wall of the vessel, our body believes that we've had an injury. And so it sends lots of cells to that area to form a clot around what it's perceived as an injury. So as that inflammation continues and that piece of plaque eventually does break away from the arterial wall, we now have a clot that's circulating. So we do know that influenza epidemics are definitely associated with significant increase in cardiovascular deaths. Acute myocardial infarcts are highest in the winter months, which is our flu season. So something to consider if you have people definitely with high cholesterol. So people with chronic lung conditions, for example, we know that chronic obstructive pulmonary disease is basically characterised by largely irreversible progressive airflow limitation. And that airway obstruction is associated with this inflammatory process in the bronchial mucosa. So when flu viruses enter into the bronchial epithelial cells, that's where they can replicate. They cause cell destruction and necrosis, which increases the permeability of the mucosa and therefore will contribute to that bronchial hyper-responsiveness. And it's that airway hyper-responsiveness that causes the airway narrowing in patients with COPD. Asthmatics, we know, particularly asthmatics with repeated exacerbations. So when we talk about free flu vaccine for asthma, we talk about free flu vaccine for severe asthmatics. So these are those patients or those individuals that are on multiple medications and they have multiple medical visits or hospitalisations per year because of their asthma exacerbations. So we know that they've got chronic damage to their airway epithelium and we therefore results in lower airway function. So they have poor airway clearance and therefore they develop these lower respiratory tract infections really very, very easily. These can then are obviously a risk to becoming a secondary bacterial infection with organisms like Streptococcus pneumoniae, Staph aureus or Haemophilus influenzae. So people with diabetes are also significant risk. We know that all bacterial and viral infections, and obviously including influenza, are associated with significant morbidity and mortality in patients with diabetes, in part because of poor glycemic control and acidosis. So the magnitude and duration of hyperglycemia is strongly associated with the severity of microvascular and neurologic complications. These add to the risk of infections. So chronic hyperglycemia causes altered function in the capillary endothelium, rigidity of the red blood corpuscles, and changes therefore how readily hemoglobin acquires and releases oxygen to the surrounding tissues. So make sure that when somebody has diabetes and they tell you that they don't need a flu vaccine because they are a healthy diabetic, we've got to remind them that they certainly do need this flu vaccine every year. We know that the research does tell us that working age adults with diabetes experience significantly greater increase, about a 6% increase in influenza attributable all-cause hospitalisations compared with working age non-diabetic adults. So definitely something to consider. We've got a lot of people with diabetes in this particular age group, and so many of them don't think that their diabetes is a significant medical condition, but we need to take it very, very seriously. Pregnant women, we start with human beings. We know that there's a lot of physiological change that happens during pregnancy, and that leaves pregnant women and their fetus at great risk for influenza and associated complications. We know that the cellular arm of our immune system, or the T cell pathway of our immune system, is temporarily altered in pregnancy. And this is really to prevent a harmful immune response towards the fetus, which is genetically foreign to the mother, and our immune system is there to fight anything that's foreign. We also know that there's physical changes in the pelvic region and the abdomen and the chest cavity, puts a lot of pressure on the organs. Lung capacity's decreased, oxygen consumption's increased, cardiac output increases as well. But we also know that influenza infection in pregnancy has been associated with an approximate 5-fold increase in perinatal mortality, including miscarriage, stillbirth, and early neonatal disease and death. First trimester maternal influenza exposure has been associated with a raised risk of a number of congenital abnormalities, including neural tube defects. And quite often this is because of the hyperthermia or the fever that people get with influenza infection, associated with hydrocephaly, congenital heart defects, cleft lip, digestive system defects, and limb reduction defects. So flu vaccination can be given during any stage of pregnancy and is recommended to be given with every pregnancy. If you have a pregnant woman at the moment, and when she first found out she was pregnant reasonably late last year, and she received a dose of 2019 formulation, if she still is pregnant when you get your flu vaccines into your fridge, you can vaccinate her with the 2020 vaccine. So just consider that if you are seeing pregnant women. Well, there's really not going to be a great deal of travellers, probably in our flu season. But we'll just quickly say that flu is a vaccine preventable disease. It reduces the risk to travellers. It is the most common vaccine preventable health risk for travellers, regardless of whether you're to what country that you are going to be visiting. If somebody comes in on Friday and says that they're going to Bali on Monday, do you still vaccinate them? Well, yes, you can. However, we do know that it's going to take probably a good 2 weeks before they're going to have a protective level of antibody immunity to fight the infection, and by then they're probably going to be home. So you could still give it, but you would need to tell them that it's probably not going to be effective for this particular trip to Bali, and to take other precautions. So yes, not much travel is going to be happening in the next few months to worry about that one, I don't believe. So if you see any of these little handbooks anywhere around in your organisation or your general practices, can you please neatly file them in the rubbish bin? They are completely out of date. So please, please, please follow the guidelines on the online immunisation handbook. And I know that this is uncomfortable for a lot of people. They love the handbook. They like something that's tangible. The handbook will never be reproduced. So we must get into the habit of accessing our online version. Honestly, the more you access it, the more proficient you will become in looking up the information that you need. So let's have a look at the free influenza program. So the free program is for individuals over 65 years of age, all children 6 months to less than 5 years of age, all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people aged 6 months and over, individuals aged greater than 6 months with this particular list of chronic conditions. If you are unsure, then please consult the handbook or the NIP schedule to see whether your patient actually does fit the criteria. Pregnant women at any stage of the pregnancy, and children aged 6 months to 10 years on long-term aspirin therapy. We would always advocate for providers to have a copy of the NIP schedule or a copy of their state and territory schedule in front of them whenever they are running vaccination clinics. So the handbook will recommend that vaccination of individuals at risk of complications of influenza is the single most important measure for preventing or lessening influenza infection and preventing mortality. Flu vaccine should definitely be offered to every single person over 6 months of age. The more people that we vaccinate in the community, the harder it is for the disease to find a susceptible host. Now, we know that flu vaccine is not perfect. We know that generally it's around about 30 to 60% effective. However, it will reduce the likelihood that you'll contract flu by about 50%. So if we can vaccinate large numbers in our community, we can protect these people in these at-risk groups.
Now, Angela, just to interrupt briefly, it may be that you're answering the question regarding the actual early application of vaccination, because some people know that the efficacy is only a few months and looking at when is the peak period. Would you like to touch on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So, you know, we will be talking about timing of vaccination because it's a bit of a tricky question. Look, optimally, the optimal level of protection post-vaccination is around about 3 to 4 months. Your immunity does not go away at the 4-month mark, but it has been shown to potentially start declining at the 4-month mark. So optimally, we would like people to be protected during the peak flu season. Now, when is the peak flu season? Good question, because that could differ from state to territory and state to territory. So, and if we look at what happened last year, we had such an early start to the season, and we really didn't have a peak as such. And I'll show you a graph in a little while. So listening to the NCIRS webinar today, Professor Christine McCarthy said that it is a great idea to vaccinate people as soon as you get vaccine into your fridges. So does that answer that question?
That's great. Thank you so much.
So we'll just finish off with this one, and we do know, of course, that flu vaccine in this particular immunocompromised group, the immunogenicity is overall reduced in these particular people. So thankfully, there's some great experts around the world that are looking at improved technologies to produce more effective vaccines. Some of those we were already using, such as the adjuvanted vaccine, which we've got Fluad for our over 65s. We've got a high dose, or we did have a high dose vaccine, Fluzone, which is no longer available in Australia. But there is cell-based vaccine technology that's currently being used in the United States, where they're using canine kidney cells, and there's also recombinant flu vaccines also available in the United States, and looking at technologies of using insect cells as the host. So the holy grail, of course, is a universal influenza vaccine. So hold on for a bit longer. The ride's going to get really exciting. We've got some exciting times ahead. So this was the question, really. Realistically, this is the first of the there's two tricky questions, and this is really the first of the tricky questions. Ultimately, as soon as you've got vaccine in your fridge, the recommendation is that you start vaccinating people. Quite often the private market stock is available before the NIP stock. So you may find that some of your eligible individuals with your chronic diseases that are eligible for NIP vaccine may choose to go to a pharmacy and pay a small fee just to get the vaccine earlier than what you have it in your fridge. If this is the case, that is their decision, and there is absolutely no recommendation or evidence to support revaccinating them later in the season. So one flu vaccine per season for almost everybody. The only people that would have the two vaccines in the same season are children less than 9 years of age receiving flu vaccine for the very first time. They would have 2 doses of vaccine with a minimum interval of 4 weeks. If they've had 1 dose of flu vaccine last year, instead of getting the 2nd dose, we do not give them 2 doses this year. It is just a single dose for them. But if they've never had a flu vaccine before, this is the very first year, and they're under 9, we give them 2 doses, 4 weeks apart, minimum interval. The other people that get 2 doses of vaccine are people that have had a hematopoietic stem cell transplant or a solid organ transplant. And this is the first time that they will be receiving flu vaccine post-transplant. So, as you can see, there really is very few people that are going to be requiring a 2-dose schedule. So one dose is seeming to be sufficient. So this is the second tricky question, because last year we were thrown that curveball with an unprecedented number of laboratory confirmed flu cases really, really early in the year. So this concept really came through last year about should we be giving 2 vaccines in the same year to bump up someone's immunity. But like I said, there really is insufficient data to support this particular practice. However, there is no contraindication to doing it. So this really needs to be a conversation with the treating medical officer to whether they, in their own mind, believe that there is some evidence around that would support that this patient that they have in front of them should have a second vaccine in the same year. But generally, it's not there is no recommendation. So if we look at adverse events, most people will tolerate this vaccine exceptionally well. There will be a proportion of people that have the localised redness, swelling, pain at the injection site. That happens with any vaccine. Some people may develop some mild flu-like symptoms, and yes, it might lay them low for a day or 2. But as we know, all of the flu vaccines that we have available to us in Australia are inactivated vaccines. So it is absolutely biologically impossible for someone to catch the flu from the vaccine. So they may have these flu-like symptoms as a post-vaccination adverse event, or they may actually have a dose of the flu, and it's just a coincidental thing that they were brewing it when we immunised them. Or it may well be a strain of the flu that we haven't immunised them against. Very rarely do we see any serious adverse events from flu vaccine. However, there are definitely some true contraindications around flu vaccine, and that is anaphylaxis following a previous dose of any influenza vaccine, or anaphylaxis following any vaccine component. People with egg allergy or even egg anaphylaxis can safely be vaccinated with vaccines that have less than 1 unit of egg over albumin per dose. And that's all of our vaccines in Australia, by the way. So you can do this in a setting where you've got people that can recognise and manage an anaphylactic response. All flu vaccines in Australia in 2020 are also classified as latex-free. So if you have individuals with latex allergy, there is no issue with flu vaccines this year. Flu composition, of course, has definitely changed from last year. Nice to see that the 2 A strains are both from Australia. We've done very, very well in having a lot of disease and obviously identifying these particular strains in Brisbane and in South Australia, which is fabulous. So all of the vaccines available against influenza in Australia in 2020 are quadrivalent vaccines. There are no 3-strain or trivalent vaccines available at all. So last year, your Fluad that you were giving to your over 65s was a 3-strain vaccine. This year, it is a Fluad quad that you will be administering to your over 65s. So if we look at number of notifications across the years, you will see that we did have a real horror season in 2017. Interestingly, in 2018, we had an exceptionally mild season. 2017 was a H3 year. 2018 was a H1 year. 2019 was a H3 year. Interestingly, we didn't get the peak that we had in 2017, but we just had a number of notifications that went quite lengthy across a timeline, as you can see from this particular graph. So if we look at the influenza stats here, we can almost see that in January this year, we were almost matching the number of flu notifications in January last year. So this made a few people a little bit nervous that there was clearly the same level of what we call interseasonal flu activity. Come February, numbers started to just drop off a little bit. So we were just sort of sitting under what we were the same time last year. But then in March, we've really dropped down. Mind you, we haven't finished our March month yet, but certainly to date. So it's something that will be watched. But you can see on the dotted lines, with that orange dotted line, which was 2019, you can see how early the season started in comparison to all of those other seasons. The purple spike that was very high is our 2017 season. So we had a big spike and high numbers, but with 2019, we didn't get the spike, but we had notifications for a lot longer and certainly much earlier in the season. You can see by the solid green line is 2020. So we started off at the same level as last year, but notifications have dropped. So as of March 16th, according to the Immunisation Coalition website, the ACT has had 166 laboratory confirmed notifications. New South Wales, 5,972. Northern Territory, 199. Queensland, 4,964. South Australia, 1,166 cases. Tasmania, 132. Victoria, 2,875. And Western Australia, 988 cases. So it's too early to predict what we will see for 2020. Whether this will be a bad year or not, we don't know. We really don't know. Most of the active subtyping occurs in the sentinel sites around Australia between the 1st of April and through to October. So there's not a lot of subtyping really that's happening. We know that it's either an A or a B strain, and that's about it. So it's just really going to be a watch, wait and see. If the mathematics is right, if the modelling is right, we could potentially expect whatever was happening in the Northern Hemisphere is what is maybe going to happen in the Southern Hemisphere. And in the flu season that is just starting to wind up now in the Northern Hemisphere, certainly they saw across the United States and Europe that their predominant strain that was circulating was a H1N1 strain. So, goodness knows, don't know.
This might be a time, and we'll just ask you briefly, is there any statistics on you've talked briefly about the efficacy of the vaccination. There is statistics on those who have actually got serious illness or passed away from influenza that were vaccinated. Do we have any information on that tonight?
We don't, well, there is information because that data does get collected.
Yes.
But trying to actually find the data is near impossible.
Right.
So we know about how many people have died where the death was directly attributed to flu. And that last year was around about 800 plus individuals. However, it's an underreported cause of death because if somebody dies of a heart attack, it's listed as a heart attack. If they've died of a stroke, it's listed as a stroke. But we know that it could have been flu that caused the heart attack and it could have been flu that caused the stroke.
Okay, so it's going to be difficult information to access.
Difficult. Yeah, very difficult. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries. Looking at the vaccines that are available, flu quadri, Vaxigrip tetra, Fluarix tetra, Afluria quad, and Fluad quad are the funded vaccines. You'll see the little blue star next to Influvac tetra. That is available on the private market. So for people to get prescriptions, etc., that is available for them. You'll see obviously that they're all quadrivalent vaccines, and you'll also see that there is no longer a junior formulation for young children. All children will receive a standard 0.5 ml dose, regardless of age. For the funded program, Fluarix tetra is the vaccine that's been funded for all risk groups from 6 months through to 5 years. Flu quadri, Vaxigrip tetra, Fluarix tetra, or Afluria quad can be used for people over 5 years of age. But the bottom line is give them a flu vaccine. They're all going to work. They're all going to be available for these age groups. Just absolutely get it into them. If you have a person that is over 65 years of age and they come in and say, oh, I've already had a flu vaccine from the pharmacist because your vaccine wasn't available for me, then there is no reason to give them the Fluad quad. If they've had a quadrivalent vaccine in 2020, they do not need to be revaccinated. Fluad quad is preferentially recommended over a standard QIV. But if the Fluad quad is not available, then give a QIV. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. But we would prefer that the over 65s have the Fluad quad because it's got the adjuvant that's going to increase the immunogenicity. Like I said before, Fluzone high dose vaccine that was available on the private market last year is not available in Australia in 2020. If we quickly look at vaccination coverage, this data was taken some time ago, but it is very difficult really to understand what the uptake of flu vaccine is. And that's because not all of these vaccines are reported to the register for a variety of different reasons. Now that the register is a whole of life, we would be hoping that all vaccine encounters are transmitted to the AIR. But if we look at last year alone, 12.1 million doses of flu vaccine was released by the TGA. 6.7 million doses were recorded on the AIR. Now, I cannot believe that 6 million doses of vaccine did not get used. I believe that they are in people's arms and for some reason not reported. We know that AIR data is better for children because it's been a standard reporting system for so long, but coverage in all children last year was around about 40%. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander coverage in 2019 for children under 5 was around about 40%. The 5 to 15-year-olds was about 30%. The 15 to 50-year-olds was about 28.9%, and 50 to 65 years was 52%. So please keep offering vaccine to all of these age groups, and please make sure that you're reporting it to the AIR. Just very quickly, COVID and influenza. We talked about symptoms being a bit similar, the risk groups very similar. Most people, apart from those in the risk groups, are experiencing mild disease. Currently, there is no vaccine, but they are working very, very hard on whether there is a vaccine or potentially another form of treatment for COVID-19. Flu vaccine will not protect people from COVID-19, but it will reduce the likelihood that people with influenza will end up presenting to hospitals and being put into hospital beds and needing a ventilator, which will be needed for people with COVID-19. So more important than ever that we offer this vaccine to everybody and stop them, and will reduce the likelihood that they'll get influenza. And I'm going to add to that, those individuals that are eligible and they meet the criteria for pneumococcal vaccination, please vaccinate them. We don't want our hospital beds filled up with people with pneumococcal pneumonia either. So if you're not sure whether your individual meets the criteria for pneumococcal vaccine, please run them through the PneumoSmart tool, which is found on the Immunisation Coalition website. So that will then guide you to whether these individuals should have a pneumococcal vaccine.
Now, Angela, it might be a good time just to answer a few more little questions that have popped up in the last few minutes before we do finish up. You mentioned the AIR and reporting. What's the pharmacy system currently doing to report?
Yes, so the pharmacy system usually operates on 2 main software programs, and both of those software programs are compatible to the AIR. So very similar to general practice.
Great.
The pharmacist just presses the upload button.
Great, thank you. We just a confirmation, we can administer pneumococcal and flu vaccination together.
Oh my word! Send
yes,
the person
indeed.
Away with 2 sore arms.
Good
please,
question.
Please.
Okay. Now, an interesting one here. A child who does not have Medicare falls under the eligible criteria. Can get a government-funded flu vaccine? Are you aware of that particular situation?
Yeah. Look, this is. I'm going to put my hand up here and I'm going to take off every professional hat that I wear.
Okay.
But I'm going to say that unfortunately the NIP vaccines are funded only for people who qualify for Medicare.
Okay, that's good for clarification. Okay. Thank you.
Now, if you get onto the Medicare website, you do have to run through a few different pages to find that information, but it does talk about people who are eligible for Medicare are the ones that meet the criteria to receive NIP-funded vaccines.
Okay, we've also got, just wanting to really encourage people's reporting to AIR,
Yes.
corporate clients, how would they go about it?
Yes, so depending on who the person that is vaccinating in the workforce, depending on how they are recording their vaccines, either on a spreadsheet or some have their own internal software programs where they make those recordings. Those, if their software is not compatible with the AIR, then we would be, unfortunately, we would be asking them to manually upload that information to the AIR.
Great, thank you.
But of course, they would need to be a registered provider with the AIR in order to access the secure site.
Okay, now a couple of things of other types of diseases and diagnoses. Obesity, is that currently considered as a chronic disease?
Not in regards to receiving a free flu vaccine, unfortunately.
Is there anything we need to consider with these patients?
Look for other chronic medical conditions that they may have.
Great, thank you.
All right, so they may have some heart disease.
Yep.
They may have diabetes. Look for another medical condition and then that qualifies them.
Fantastic, thank you. That's good. So I think that's almost done there. Now I am vigilant of time. There's probably just time for one more question before we summarise, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure.
We have a specific one, a question from a GP. Can they use Fluad Quad for very immunocompromised patients who are over 65?
Okay. If you've got an immunocompromised individual that's over 65,
yes.
then yes, definitely be giving them Fluad Quad. Every individual over 65 ideally should be getting that vaccine, and it's just the one dose, unless of course they've had the hematopoietic stem cell transplant or the solid organ transplant.
And if they're under 65, they can still have it, can't they? But just they pay for it from there.
Okay, so if they're under 65, this is a really good question because some countries around the world are using this vaccine in younger age groups. However, the only Fluad Quad that you are going to find in Australia is on the funded immunisation program. You will not be able to write a prescription for it and prescribe it off licence.
Okay, thank you for that. Now the questions are really coming in now, but I think what we might do is summarise, and I will take those questions that we haven't answered. People can email us, but I will also take these questions, record them and answer them on the document that we upload with the website recording.
Sure, and we will definitely chase that up around children with and without Medicare cards receiving government-funded vaccines.
Great.
I will definitely chase that up because I've had to do that for a provider recently who had been asked by their state health department not to give NIP vaccine to people without Medicare cards. So I think the lines are very blurred depending on what state you are in, but I will certainly follow that information up.
Okay, thank you. We'll also follow up with the information about obesity and give you a little bit more of a clearer understanding of that in our document that we upload next week.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we're almost there. Practice nurses, if any of you out there are practice nurses, you are angels on this earth. You are so accessible. You are the absolute advocate for adult immunisation. So please keep adult immunisation in the front of your minds. Offer those pneumococcal vaccines. Offer your Zostavax. We've only had about a 70% uptake nationally of Zostavax. So we've got a lot of older Australians that really need that vaccine. But definitely vaccinate them with flu vaccine. Vaccinate all adults with flu vaccine. You know, the information that you give your patients is really, really credible. And we know that people that receive information from their GP or their nurse are about 9 to 10 times more likely to receive a flu vaccine. So continue to talk. So just concluding, we've just gone over time, so I'll just run through these really quickly. Flu can be a very serious disease, particularly with people with underlying medical conditions and pregnant women, but it can be a serious disease for everybody. So please continue to offer flu vaccine. They're all quadrivalent, free flu vaccine for those children under 5 years of age, but they must have turned 6 months of age. Otherwise, they're too young to be vaccinated. Vaccinate people that are in close contact with those at-risk groups. And definitely really undertake that robust pre-vaccination checklist to identify those at-risk individuals. And that pre-vaccination checklist should be undertaken before any vaccinations are ever given. So thank you very much, Susie, and thank you everybody for spending your time with us tonight. I hope it's been useful.
Of course it has, Angela. Thank you so much. Now, I see I have taken all of those other questions we didn't get to tonight. Once again, thank you so much for your support of the Immunisation Coalition, and a great presentation, lots of great information there. For those of you, good evening. Thank you very much for coming along, and we will, as I said, upload the recording to the Immunisation Coalition with some answers to your questions in the coming week. Please, please distribute information about what we do and the resources we supply to your networks in the hope that we can really increase vaccination to protect the community moving forward. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Susie.
Okay, bye, Angela.
Okay, bye.